billions of Google redirects to stop working next year. What is going on?
Probably a lot of those billions of redirects are not carrying any traffic anymore anyway. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, especially for SEO, but we have another update from Google and they're saying, actually now we're going to render all pages and that's going to be the future and that's going to be great forever.
Should I really go for JavaScript or should I stick to HTML?
One issue that you've got is by default, web browsers only execute JavaScript through... Most web browsers can connect with those multiple processing threads and processing cores. JavaScript is still all pushed into one single processing thread. You basically end up with bottlenecks if you use too much JavaScript. So you've still kind of got issues in that area because Reddit gets preferential treatment in Google search results.
Why anonymous Reddit content can outrank expert advice from credible websites.
The real question is, why are the users demanding so much data specifically from Reddit? Microsoft had been a major investor in OpenAI. Well, AI just works better with more data, so give it all the data in the world. Actually, it doesn't. Google Gemini and Google's AI overview are catching up to OpenAI, who have a lot of data, but infinitely less data than Google. One of the reasons that Google became so successful as they are is that...
Welcome to SEO Gurus. This is the first episode of a very special series, the SEO Gurus Monthly Update. In this series of episodes, my co-host James Allen and myself cover the latest news in the SEO world. We discuss the latest Google's updates and news, what is happening in the SEO space in general, and the little gems that we thought worthy talking about. We, of course, give our sometimes biased opinions as SEOs and webmasters, and if there are topics that you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to reach out to James or myself, Guillaume Jouvencel, via email or on LinkedIn. We'll put all the links in the description. This episode is brought to you by GHA Marketing, and we hope you'll enjoy our conversation. James, there has been a news published recently on Search Engine Land as to the fact that billions of Google redirects to stop working next year. What is going on?
Yeah, so that's, thanks for having me on again today. And I guess we're kind of here to cover a few different things, few different news pieces that we've kind of shared with each other and that we've kind of found over the past month as we've been kind of looking on our RSS readers and stuff. And one of the things that's come up for sure is this, post that appeared on Search Engine Land, billions of Google redirects to stop working. And it sounds, wow, that is a really good title to hook people, don't you think?
Indeed, 100%.
So, but more what it's related to is the fact that Google used to have a URL shortener called goo.gl, so goo.gl. And if you're unfamiliar with URL shorteners, there's still plenty on the web. Like I think TinyURL is another one.
Yeah.
And their purpose is kind of twofold. A, it's to make URLs smaller if you want to share them with people, and then B, usually there's some kind of tracking element as well because they work through redirect architecture. So essentially, a little while ago, Google decided, they were going to shut down goo.gl, which was their own native URL shortener, which a lot of people were using. And what this means is that, in the coming weeks and months, obviously, a lot of those URLs are just going to stop redirecting. They're going to cease to function. So I believe that Google previously already took away the goo.gl kind of interface. They limited users from creating new short links using that service some time ago now. So now, not only can you not create new short links using that service, in addition to that, all the legacy ones that were created will kind of stop working as well. And I guess the reason that they say, billions of redirects are going to stop working, what they mean by that is that, it was just a popular service. Lots of people created lots of short links using that tool. But often they were only created kind of like for one-time events, like marketing events and stuff. So my anticipation personally is that, yes, billions of redirects are going to stop working, but probably a lot of those billions of redirects are not carrying any traffic anymore anyway, I would say.
Right. So it's funny because we use to track traffic towards different sources when it comes to the podcast world, right? You want to be able to say to your sponsors, hey, that many people clicked on the link in the show notes, blah, 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 blah. We use Bitly. So as you said, right, tiny URL, and I'm sure there are plenty of others. Don't want to make any discrimination here. This episode is not sponsored by Bitly, although they have a good product. But so, what is Google trying to achieve here? Because, I mean, okay, they are stopping it, so that's going to create a mess for people who had those links and who potentially still have traffic coming from it. And it also means broken link, right? Am I right here, or?
Yeah, in some situations it will do, because essentially, when you try and use one of those short URLs and you're kind of expecting that short URL to redirect somewhere because you use the URL shortener, it's just going to break. But, as I've said, I think probably a lot of those short URLs, they're usually created for like individual campaigns that run over like a short period, or like one-off marketing events and stuff. So my anticipation is that, probably it's not going to do really that much damage because a lot of those URLs probably are not carrying that much traffic anymore anyway. But like you say, maybe there will be some people who are kind of using them in a bit more of an evergreen way, and there's going to be some people who are impacted. So I guess the thing that you really have to think about is, well, why did Google kind of create this in the first place?
Right.
As we know, Google likes to create lots of things. There's like tons of stuff in Google Labs, and there's Google Analytics and Google Search Console, and
Indeed.
There's Google Docs to do your work on, and there's all manner of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, looking at goo.gl, I think it was kind of like, I would say maybe like lagging behind other short URL providers in terms of the analytics side. Like, I think it was just very basic from memory. So like last time I used it, which was some years ago now, it was just create the URL and it'd be like, oh, it got this many hits and that's it. There wasn't kind of really any detailed information, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I guess it must just be like, from my perspective, it seems like it is kind of like a business decision. It's like, well, if we want to be the best URL, on the one hand, maybe they've decided that URL shorteners are kind of a bit of a loss leader and they're not a great platform to create if you want to make profit, right? And then on the other hand, maybe they've decided, well, it could be, but it's not currently worth investing the effort when we've got our AI crusade on and we've got lots of other things to pay attention to, and things that are probably a technology that's going to be, in the long run, a lot more profitable than a website that just redirects one URL to another, which, if you think about it, the functionality is pretty basic, right? So
100%. No, I love this. And I love the AI crusade, which we're going to get back to in a few minutes, I feel. But so before we move on to the next main news of the month, then, my question is why we care, and maybe what should webmasters and SEO do? Because I suppose that within the people listening to us right now, and many people across internet, they have users of these goo.gl links. So what should we do?
So, like, personally, I think the first thing I'd say is just don't panic, because I don't think it's going to be as much of a, like when you read the title, billions of redirects going to stop working and stuff. And, everyone writes the titles of their articles to attract clicks and stuff, but it kind of sounds pretty severe. I don't think, myself included, by the way, because I write on Search Engine Land myself. So, but the thing is that I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, especially for SEO. But, if you want to do your due diligence, like you say, it really couldn't hurt to just, draw up a list of all of the different short URLs that your organization is using, and then to determine which of those are based on the goo.gl platform, and maybe to recreate those on a separate platform, right? So maybe take those to TinyURL or to Bitly or somewhere else, right?
Go to Google's competition, basically, is our advice, I guess, here.
Yeah, or no longer Google's competition, because they're shutting down that service. But yeah,
indeed.
Who were previously Google's competition, we should say.
Right.
So, yeah.
Actually, you're very right. Moving on to the next topic then. Google under investigation in Italy over user content practices. So here, I think on this one is going to be pretty interesting, because we have in Europe, we're good Europeans at this kind of stuff, we have the Digital Market Act, right? So maybe before we dig into this Italy news, can you remind us of what is that exactly, and what does that entail, and what it means for Google, but also therefore webmasters and eventually SEAs?
Yeah, so reading from what I believe is the official website, the Digital Markets Act (DMA) establishes a set of clearly defined objectives or objective criteria to identify what they call gatekeepers, right? So gatekeepers are large digital platforms providing, and I love how they put this here, so-called core platform services, such as, for example, online search engines, app stores, messenger services. I would imagine you'd probably throw social networks in there as well, stuff like Facebook.
Right.
So gatekeepers will have to comply with the do's, i.e. obligations, and don'ts, i.e. prohibitions, listed in the DMA. So it just seems to be extended regulatory framework within the EU to kind of maybe like rein in large tech companies a little bit, especially those with significant web presence, and especially those who kind of impact our lives on a daily basis, if that makes any sense.
No, 100%. And I mean, from a European perspective, I think we're good at putting, in French we say, wooden sticks in the wheels of people and big techs, especially when it comes to regulation. And there is recently this micro USB thing for the Apple chargers, for instance. But so, what does it mean, maybe from an end user perspective, to have this Digital Markets Act in place? Kind of, I mean, I was going to be biased here, protecting us, but that's maybe not necessarily true, or at least. What does that mean for the end user, according to you, James?
Well, yeah, I'd say is what the legislators probably want us to believe, and I'm not party to all of those decisions, which
Right.
may or may not be partially politically motivated.
Right.
But the general idea is to kind of protect us more online. So, and where they say, you're going to have things that you're responsible for and you have to do those things. And there's going to be things that they're prohibited from doing as well. I guess that a lot of that probably might revolve around the kinds of information that are shared on their platforms, and maybe making them more responsible for... Because I've personally felt that this has kind of been the EU's direction for quite a while, is to kind of make the big providers and the platforms more responsible, not just for their own produced material, but for UGC, which is produced on their network as well.
Yeah.
And, if other users are producing like what they might deem to be fake news or, like harmful material, which could, lead people to really difficult, tricky situations, then... I guess that there's going to be more focus on, you must take responsibility and you must prevent that kind of material circulating. And then the prohibitions will probably be kind of the opposite thing, I suppose, where it'll be like, make sure that this kind of stuff isn't on there.
Yeah.
But, obviously you live in the EU, so you might have a perspective on this legislation as well. What I can tell you is that I think in the UK we're trying to copy it. So we came out with and this is kind of funny, we came out with the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act. So it's not the DMA, it's the DMCCA, because of course we have to have a longer acronym and make it sound more significant. That's what we always do over here, right? So, but as far as I'm aware, it's essentially very similar to the DMA in the EU. But I'd be interested to hear kind of like your perspective on the DMA as well, and also what you think it means for online consumers and stuff. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, Hussam and I have this, I was going to say really interesting opinion. I don't know if it's really interesting, but we're like, companies are in the business of making money, like as a general rule of thumb, right? What a company wants is to grow. And the problem with that is that you can go to certain extents, if you're not regulated, right, to make as much money as possible and be harmful or hurtful to the nature, to people whatsoever. So we're like, but if a company can make as much money as possible, even if the morality is questionable, some of them might. So we think that it's the role of the regulator and the government to set clear boundaries on what's doable and what's not doable. And now I guess there is always this thin line of saying, okay, we're going to heavily regulate this market, but then actors within this place cannot really do what would allow for end users to have a better life. If we say, okay, I'm a Google user, I want to be able to... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what you're saying is you kind of have this balance, right? You have like a balance between kind of like what you might call like, like unregulated capitalism, where maybe a business is aiming to make profit and the business doesn't do very well that quarter and they're like, well, fine, we just won't pay our staff as much then. And you get all these kind of problems. And that's why you need regulation. But on the other hand, too much regulation can lead to kind of like stifling the innovation that creates wealth in the first place. So there's kind of this balance in the middle, right? Is what you're getting at.
So 100%, and I would add to this, and here I have nothing against Google, obviously, I'm a fervent user, but the thing is, I think Google has always been very good at like potentially, let's say, lobbying on making sure that they keep the untold monopoly that they have around search. Well, it's kind of moving right now because and we're going to cover it in a few minutes, but there are some moving pieces that are entering into the game. But still, Google is very, very good at, owning this market. And they also have whatever happens, AI or whatever tools, they have now, 25, 30 years of users' data that they are the only ones to own, right? So they have a huge competitive advantage. So any regulation that doesn't get too much into the way of the user's experience and the type of results that a user could get, but at the same time says to Google, hey, you're going to be responsible for certain things that are happening, and we want to make sure that everything is done fairly towards the user for sure, but potentially competitors as well. So other actors can come in, provide certain better insights, which pushes everybody to get better. So in my opinion, I didn't dig too much into the DMA in particular, but I'm like, anything that can ensure more fairness, more accountability from the different actors can only be good. And that the line is always, okay, but if it's getting too much in the way of innovation, then we are, again, the European Union, just, like stopping innovation from happening and our neighbors or, let's say, other countries taking an advance on it. So I guess it's a bit of a thin line. And I want to cover a bit more what's happening in Italy. I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense that we will try to regulate that and, at least have Google say, hey, you're going to have to be responsible for what's happening here if something goes wrong. I don't know. I guess that's my very opinionated take on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty spot on, I think the reason why it's particularly important, the case in Italy is that it seems as if in Italy they're kind of dealing with some issues that haven't yet gone through the courts. So, and as you know, it's usually only when, things go through a court in a particular country or particular nation, and that's where you often hear the phrase, this kind of sets a precedent, right? Yeah. It's like, well, all this expertise and experience went into deciding this outcome, so we're now going to refer to that outcome in all future outcomes, right? That's kind of how courts operate broadly, especially here in the UK as well. So it's kind of significant because I guess the ruling will set a precedent in terms of how other nations in the EU and also, will pay attention here in the UK as well, might kind of enforce that regulation, which in the EU is the DMA, and over here, as I've said, in the UK, we've kind of got our own version, our own special version as well. So,
But so for the listeners, James, and people who might not have gone over the news exactly, so what's happening in Italy exactly, and what is Google being under investigation for?
Right. So essentially, the European Commission, I think, already has their own independent probe into Google, which relates to the content of the Digital Marketing Act. Mm-hmm. And I think that the case that's been brought in Italy, it largely revolves around a lot of that same stuff. But I think there's some unique elements to the case. I mean, I'd have to look at it in a bit more detail, but I think there's essentially some unique elements to the case that haven't currently been covered by the European Commission in their separate case, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So for those specific individual things, those specific individual elements that are going through the courts in Italy, that might be something that, the European Commission might kind of pay attention to that and go, oh, well, this is something maybe we could add to our case or whatever. So...
Yeah. So if I just read the article plainly, it's like, so for context, the DMA requires gatekeepers to obtain user consent before processing personal data for advertising or campaigning data. And the controversy, or actually what's going under investigation right now in Italy, is that it focuses on how Google obtains consent to link users' activity across its services. So
across
not only
advertising platforms and stuff, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, I remember.
So there is the search, but there is also YouTube, there is Chrome, there is Maps. So basically, not only saying, hey, we're going to kind of tailor the ads depending on what you search, but now it's saying, hey, we're going to link all our platforms, meaning what you're looking for on YouTube, we're also going to take that into account. Same for Chrome, same for Maps. So when I'm thinking about the advertisers, and like you and I who have a website who might want to advertise our services, this allows for much better targeting, obviously, because we know exactly that what the person is up to. But then it's also like, hey, that's unfair commercial practices here, because they basically just own the whole market of the internet, and they can do a much better job than any potential competitor.
That, and I think there's also the fact that they're probably going to link the user data between all the platforms as well.
Right.
That's kind of what I read when I was reading it. I was like, oh, so they're essentially going to be able to link maybe a user journey or an individual user's session throughout all of those different platforms together. Because obviously, that's something that since GDPR became a thing,
right.
is kind of been like a holy grail, like sessions and session data isn't what it used to be due to, cookies not always being present and stuff like that. And
right.
due to that, how can we relink the user session,
Yeah.
And I suppose that's a lot easier if you have kind of a monopoly over a kind of self-contained network of search and video in all different places, and you can probably link the data from your end, maybe using like server-side analytics or something like that, much more easily, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that makes 100% sense. So just curious to see what's going to be the ruling on this. I guess we are in for a ride of like a few months at least. So let's see what happens. Next news then, James. Google renders all pages for search, including JavaScript-heavy sites. So here we are talking about stuff that I have no clue what we're talking about. So I'm going to rely completely on your expertise, James. So what does that mean? What's happening? What does it change? And why do we care?
To understand this a bit more, you're going to kind of have to understand a bit more of the history of kind of Google's crawling technology in the web and stuff. And essentially, Google always just used to, if you go back, I don't know, over 15 years or something like that, probably even further back than that, Google mostly used to just kind of crawl the source code of pages. And that means kind of like the non-modified code. So if a web page references any scripts which kind of dynamically modify some of the content of the page, then Google wouldn't be taking any of that stuff into account. And you would have used to have heard SEOs complaining a lot about, that's generated content, and the search engine's not going to be able to pick it up, and we need to somehow provide a fallback to that or kind of make it static. And then, some years ago, Google began saying, actually, guys, we can render JavaScript. And then everyone said, okay, well, Google can render JavaScript now, so we're just going to, because JavaScript can be, pretty easy with some frameworks like Nuxt and Vue and stuff like that. And, we'll just build really quick single-page application websites because, they are really slick and they're really nice. And they're also really nice to work on if you're a developer as well. Stuff like Vue makes kind of like coding the sites much easier and creating your single-page applications and stuff. And then what happened was a load of those sites just didn't rank very well at all. And then SEOs kind of discovered, well, Google have said that they can render JavaScript, and can being the operative word, but they wouldn't always. And, at that time, it was kind of a time where, if you had like a website and it had some small elements inside of the page which required JavaScript execution, Google would kind of execute those individual things, small little bits and pieces. But if you built your whole entire site out of, an executable language like JavaScript or something like that, then, in that situation, Google would be like, I'm not going to execute your entire site. I'm not going to spin up a headless browser to, perform those executions because it's just going to be too much. And so, Google had been saying, we can execute JavaScript, and then people built entire sites out of JavaScript, and then they didn't rank very well. Now, we have another update from Google, and they're saying, actually now, we're going to render all pages. And what that means is that for all of the pages that they visit on the web, they're going to spin up a headless browser. And not only are they going to check the source code, but anything that they find on the page which is executable, that kind of creates dynamic elements and stuff like JavaScript, they're going to execute all of that stuff as well. And then they're going to look at the code of the page after everything's executed. So from this, you might be like, oh, hallelujah, finally now, this time it's definitely not lies. This time, for sure, we can just completely just build all of our sites out of JavaScript, and that's going to be the future, and that's going to be great forever. But of course, so one issue that you've got is that by default, web browsers only execute JavaScript through the main processing thread of the web browser, which has to do other stuff as well, like the general rendering of the page and styling and layout, and it's got other things to do as well. And so even though we live in a world where, almost all machines now have multiple processing threads and processing cores, and most web browsers can connect with those multiple processing threads and processing cores, JavaScript is still all pushed into one single processing thread, which means that you basically end up with bottlenecks if you use too much JavaScript. So you've still kind of got issues in that area because of the nature of how web browsers work. So stuff like server-side rendering and stuff like that is still going to be really good and is still going to be really useful. And so, yeah, I still think that there's advantages to not doing absolutely everything in JavaScript all of the time. You also kind of have to read between the lines a bit in terms of what Google has said and suggested as well, because, they've said, okay, well, we are going to render all of the pages that we come across, and that's really good. That's really great. But on the other hand, does that mean like their base crawler will open a page and render that complete page and then move on to another page? Or in the interests of time and speed, will they look at the source code of a page and then move on to another page, and then will they queue the rendering in some kind of rendering queue that sits separately? And will, in fact, Google actually still make some determinations from the base source code before the rendering is completed? And that's something that's possible. I'm not saying that necessarily is the case, but all I'm saying is when Google make broad statements like this, don't just jump on it and make an assumption, oh, it's all going to be great now, everything's fixed. Because we've been taught time and again in the past that, when broad statements are made like this, people will kind of pick those up and run with those statements, and then obviously problems occur, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this at all. It's a pretty techie thing, but...
No, but I love it. That's super interesting. So I guess my take here is, my question is, so let's say I'm a developer, I'm a webmaster, I'm building websites with either HTML or JavaScript. Should I really go for JavaScript, or should I stick to HTML just to make sure that, in the coming month, we don't learn that Google is still not ranking my website really well?
I would say these days, most sites do actually use a mixture of both.
Okay.
And it's really not common to find a website that has absolutely no JavaScript deployed at all. There's some people who love building sites like that, no JavaScript, and it's as lean as possible. And that's kind of like a brutalist web design, if that makes any sense. And it's actually a movement. There's whole galleries online showcasing these brutalist websites. Some of them look pretty cool, but they're made by specific people for specific needs. Most websites will at least use JavaScript. So, for example, even if you build your whole site, using HTML and CSS and stuff, if you want Google Analytics, you've got to execute a script. So no JavaScript is no Google Analytics, right? So that's something you might not know. But what I would say to you is, I think if you build entire websites out of JavaScript, and pretty much everything's just dynamic, like single-page application sites, they should perform better than they used to. But I would still recommend Node.js fallbacks and server-side rendering and basically kinds of technologies where you can load more of the dynamically generated content into the source code so that Google can still kind of crawl that anyway more quickly.
Right.
I would still recommend that, but I think that Java, sites that are entirely built in JavaScript, they're probably going to be less punished than they were. But I'm very hesitant to say that architecture is completely fine now, because there's been news posts like this in the past, and as we know, sometimes a broad statement has exceptions, and it's those exceptions that, they kind of go unvoiced and they kind of create problems down the line, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, no, 100%. So I'd say, maybe before we move on to the next topic, I'd say if I'm a JavaScript developer or like boutique that does JavaScript developments, I'm pretty happy of this news, because that means like more people are eventually going to use JavaScript. But no, that makes a lot of sense. Cool, James. Moving on to the next.
I certainly think it's. Oh,
go
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say I think it could be a step towards a future where potentially web browsers might have more instances of multi-threaded behavior by default. But we'll kind of have to wait and see on that. So, yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So, Google, removing massive disavow lists should not worry you. So here, for a bit more context, there is a certain John Mueller from Google who was asked if you should worry that massive link disavow list can hurt you negatively, and also if you remove the list that it might also hurt you. So what's happening here, James? And that's a topic I'm quite interested in, because I have heard a lot of controversy around the disavow link tool. So what's happening here?
So basically, over the past few years, and probably even going back before that, Gary Illies and also John Mueller as well, who both hold positions at Google, have basically been on a crusade to downplay the importance of the disavow tool, and probably rightly so, I would say. So essentially, to understand what the disavow tool is, you have to go... Oh, sorry.
No, exactly. So I understand that you just go in the disavow, I think it's in Search Console, right? You just go there and you say, hey, I have this link going to my website, but I actually didn't ask for it, and it's actually hurtful for my website, so I'd like to disavow it. Is that correct? Okay.
That was initially the purpose of the tool, correct? However, it has been completely irrelevant for a very long time. And so the reason for this is that you kind of have to go back a lot of years to so nowadays, a lot of the updates that Google release into their core ranking algorithms, they're kind of really intravenous, and they're kind of small, and they make a minor change, and it kind of intravenously is woven into, the rest of the core ranking algorithms, and it serves its purpose, and there it is. But if you go back years, just like over a decade ago or whatever, there was a time when Google very much didn't work that way, and the updates weren't small and nuanced and intravenous, and they were large, and they had their own names like Mayday and Farmer and Caffeine. And two of the last of those updates, which were named updates, which, they kind of developed them separately, and then they pushed them into the engine, and it caused big upheaval through all of Google SERPs and stuff. Two of the last of those were named Panda and Penguin. And Panda revolved around looking for spammy content and kind of devaluing pages that had spammy content. And Penguin was all about links, all about the links that point to your site. So going back to, even years before Panda and Penguin, you have the PageRank algorithm, which is still one of the algorithms which is active inside Google's various ranking algorithms, right? And what it attempts to do is say, okay, here's your web page on the web, and there's this other page over here, and there's like 3 other pages over here, and they're all linking to you. And those hyperlinks from their website to your website, that kind of counts as like a vote of confidence that your website knows something about the stuff that they're talking about. And it's kind of like the fuel that powers rankings, if that makes sense, kind of what links are. So obviously people kind of got really familiar with this, and then people were like, well, if your link network links all your pages to this page on my site, and then my link network can do the same to your one over there, and the people who knew more about SEO and who were big webmasters with big networks of different pages and websites, they were kind of able to largely control Google's results, right? And you can imagine why Google might not want this, because Google wanted to list the pages that were best for the user rather than the pages that were created by the people who happen to know the most about link building, right?
Yeah.
You can see that why Google would want it to be a bit more impartial than that. And so they released 100%. This Penguin update, and that was aimed at, finding, if too many links come from a low value site to your site, that's like a site-wide link, that's a spammy link. And there were all these different criteria to say, so not only can links be good, but now some links can be bad, and you can have toxic links as well that are bad for your website and bad for your backlink profile. And so the purpose of the disavow tool was that when you were in Google Search Console and you received a manual notification, and that notification stated that you had received a manual action for spammy link practices and you had bad links pointing to your site, you then had to basically go through the process of producing something that was called a reconsideration request, which is where you would ask Google to reconsider whether your domain could, whether you could have a place in Google's rankings again. And some of these cases were severe. When that notice appeared in Search Console, sometimes a site would stop ranking even for its own brand terms. It was really, really fun. And so... So Google released this disavow tool, and like you said earlier, it allowed you to upload lists of links that were pointing from other sites to your website, or sometimes you didn't have to do it at the individual link level. You could do it at the domain level. You could say, if there's any links from this domain, just discount all of them. And that would then let Google know that you were kind of taking it seriously, and, you were kind of making a concerted effort to kind of help them to identify spammy links. So it's kind of a trade. Google was saying, if you help us to do our job of identifying spammy link networks a bit, because you've been a bad guy, then then we will overlook that, and Google will shine its benevolence again upon you, and you will be able to rank again in the search results. And it was that kind of thing. It was really kind of a strange time, if I'm being honest with you. It was kind of strange. But obviously, since those times, it's not often now. I certainly haven't seen a manual penalty notice in Search Console for a long time. Yeah. Probably, close, from my side, probably close on 10 years, it's been.
Wow.
And so I've noticed on Twitter before it was X, just every now and then, every few months or so, someone will post something in one of the webmaster groups or something, and they'll say, oh, this agency has just commissioned me to look through all my links and find out what all the spammy links are and upload those in the disavow tool, and I paid hundreds of pounds for it. And, every now and then you'll get someone who'll chime in, like John Mueller, who'll say, just don't do that anymore. You don't need to do that work anymore. Because the thing is, the nature in the way in which Google kind of updates itself and handles those kind of situations has changed. So nowadays the updates, they're kind of a lot more intravenous, and it's more like, it's basically more like Google will identify various link networks and stuff, and rather than penalizing you and removing you from the rankings, they'll just say, okay, those particular links that we've identified, those just don't count anymore. And because they don't count anymore, your authority will go down a bit. It's not the same as a manual action where you were completely removed from Google's results, right? And if you disavow those links, you're not going to get any authority back, because Google has already decided that those links aren't worth anything anymore. No. So effectively now, at this point, there really isn't any point in using the disavow tool anymore, unless, I guess, you're one of the really, 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 really unlucky ones who might still get a manual link action notice. But I haven't seen one in years.
So I have a question that kind of has nothing to do with this very topic, but a bit as well. So I'm a bit curious, like when you're looking at a company the size of Google and at a topic as important as the one of search, I'm looking at this LinkedIn thread where a certain Michael Martucci asked that question, right, about what we just covered. Like, okay, disavow list, no disavow list, removing this list. Like, will it be harmful in any ways? Harmful, whatever the correct English is here. And then you have John Mueller saying, who is a senior search analyst, search relation team lead at Google, says 0. Do they have do employees like John just have like a white card from Google to say, hey, you can have open communications like this? Because I'm like, this looks nothing like official, but at the same time, I guess if John says, hey, it doesn't have any impact actually, so just do whatever, but you shouldn't look too much into the deserve list. Like, how does Google manage this? Like, can anybody from Google just speak up?
I think actually, no, I don't think so. I think that there are certain positions at Google where Google accepts that they are kind of a bit more public facing.
Interesting.
And if you look a bit more into John Mueller, who I've actually usually always found his posts to be quite informative and pretty on the mark.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look a bit more into him, I think you'll find that, I'm not sure if it's still his current position, but at one point he was known as like a search advocate at Google, which is kind of like a public facing position where it's someone who's almost like a liaison between Google's wider search team and how the search engine works and stuff, and webmasters and all of the various questions that they ask. And I think the reason that he kind of ended up in that seat is that if you go back many, 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 many years, and you'll still be able to find lots of his like webmaster videos on YouTube and stuff. There was a guy called Matt Cutts who basically occupied that very same seat. And it was very explicit that, you know, he was basically the face of search to the public. But he was more so part of Google's anti-spam team, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But of course, when you're trying to promote your business using Google, you know, one of the main questions that we, the webmasters, and we, the public, had is, you know, we want to promote ourselves, but we don't want to promote ourselves so aggressively that it's seen as spam. And we had so many thousands of technical questions, and it would be Matt Cutts who would answer a vast majority of those questions, or who would make the valiant attempt to, we should say. And I think John Mueller just kind of, you know, when Matt sort of left, I think John Mueller kind of fell into that same seat at Google that kind of informally exists, where it's kind of like a seat in between the webmasters and the public and all our thousands of questions about search, and between Google and their search team and their own interpretations of how their own search engine works, right? So does that answer your question, or did I just...
No, 100%. And I'm just thinking, 100%, James. And I'm just thinking, so whilst I see how that a position like this could come with a lot of pressure, right? Because you might not want to miscommunicate on anything related to Google. I'm also like, but maybe it's just my previous consulting experience that speaks here. Like, senior analyst would mean that you were just below manager, but then you still had the grade of director and then partner and senior partner whatsoever. But so senior analyst, not to say that it's a very junior position, because I understand that within Google it might work a bit differently, but you wouldn't be typically the one speaking at public event or like being the online figure, let's say. So I'm like, this is gold. Like, it's gold to be in a position like this. It comes with a lot of pressure, but it's also really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid observation. I think it would be a great position to occupy. Like you say, I think it definitely would come with stresses. You know, I definitely think it would. But I think, you know, something that's interesting is that I think particularly in the West, and I would say probably especially in the UK actually, and in the USA as well, our innovation has kind of lagged behind a bit in recent decades, probably because of our refusal to value engineers and engineering type staff as much as they should be.
All right.
And obviously you have places in the West that have different cultures to that, okay? So like in Germany, any one of a kind of... And when I say engineering, I don't mean they necessarily have to be like a physical engineer. I mean, it could be a software engineer or... So I'm using the word engineer in an extremely broad way.
Right.
But I think there's places like Germany where they do value those types of staff. And I think one of the reasons that Google became so successful as they are is that, you know, going against the grain of how many other tech organizations are working in the West, they do value their analytical engineering staff, and they value them very highly. And so I think your observation that maybe things in that way work differently at Google is probably very valid. And I would say that, there are probably analysts at Google on a higher pay grade than owners of individual agencies in the UK, far above, So I think, in my opinion, he's very much someone worth hearing from, so.
Cool. Who knows? Maybe we'll have John on this very podcast someday, James, to accompany you in our monthly updates. John, if you're listening to this, you're more than welcome. Cool. Next topic then, James. OpenAI. Actually, that's something that might make Google a bit, not worried. I don't know. Let's see. So OpenAI is, quote unquote, going to build a search product. What's happening here?
I'm actually surprised this didn't happen sooner, right? So,
right.
And I'm really surprised this didn't happen sooner. Obviously, what does that mean, though? What does that mean? Because obviously, OpenAI have been working. Right. I think, as we both know, OpenAI have been working with Microsoft, right, and Bing, and they've had some integrations of their various GPT-based solutions, including ChatGPT. They've had various kind of integrations with Bing and stuff. And so my understanding was that, since Microsoft had been a major investor in OpenAI, that, they were kind of linking arms, and that was going to be a powerful contender for the future of search. And so now to hear OpenAI are going to make their own search product, but does that mean that it's going to be some all new thing that they're doing with Microsoft that's going to make everything else look like garbage? Or does it mean that they are entirely doing their own thing? You know what I mean? Do you find that to be an interesting question?
So I do, and I'm actually super curious to see how this unfolds, because I can't help but thinking from my very small understanding for now of the search world is that data is not king. It's like data is the freaking emperor of the world, like the world conqueror. Google sits on a set of 25 years worth of data from literally almost every user on the internet. When you think that AI is trained on data, you can make the link. Google has an advantage here. So when it comes to search, I understand that Google probably delays the kind of arrival of their own AI, really brought out there with really performing, because they want to put something great out there. And I'm is OpenAI going to be able to compete with 25 years worth of data?
I think, unfortunately for Google, they already are.
Interesting.
And I think the proof of that is the fact that with infinitely less data, and you're right, machine learning, and we've all been taught that so far AI and machine learning make the most from the largest pile of data possible, right? And what does Google have? Google has an index of the internet. Well, not the entire internet, but a big chunk of it, shall we say. And so you might consider that to be a substantial amount of data, mightn't you? Yeah. So then why is it that, OpenAI just brought out GPT-4o, as in the letter O.
Okay.
But before that, there was just GPT-4. And even GPT-4 it's just vast. It absolutely outperformed Google Bard. And now that Bard is Gemini's really not doing that much better against OpenAI's AI. And so I started wondering to myself, why is that? Because, Google has so much more data that they're feeding it. Mm-hmm. And it didn't click to me until after OpenAI released GPT-4o, which just came shortly after ChatGPT-4, right?
Yeah.
The major difference between GPT-4 and GPT-4o is that GPT-4, it is slower, but it confines itself to its own large but curated data model, right? Yeah. And it kind of thinks more deeply. Whereas GPT-4o is faster, and it still has access to a curated data model, But a lot more, it will just do stuff like perform a search query on the web to get information and stuff like that. And then it will work so the point is it will work off information from the web more regularly than it used to, right? So more regularly it will source information from the web, less frequently from its own data model. And it is very fast, and in some ways it's very impressive. And of course, it can reference more recent events because it can access live information from the web. But the output, when you give it a complex task to do something, the output is often inferior to GPT-4. Now, isn't that interesting? And it seems to be demonstrating that when you give AI unbridled access to the web, be that Google's big cache of the web for Gemini, or for GPT-4.0, live checking stuff from the web and performing search results and stuff, actually the value of the produced information or content actually decreases a little bit, which is the opposite of what we've come to expect from AI. And the only thing that I can possibly put it down to is that the web does contain, the sum of human knowledge, and it is a powerful learning resource. But, should you give a child, a very young child, should you give them unbridled access to the internet, or should you give them an encyclopedia? Most people would say, well, you should probably give them the encyclopedia because, if they're 3 or 4 years old and they're trying to use a computer and they end up somewhere on the web they shouldn't, they see something harmful and they think that's how the world is. And I think that's almost where AI is kind of in danger of going, because AI, I don't think, is yet mature enough to differentiate between fact and fiction to a sufficient degree that giving it access to all the information in the world actually helps it. Once it crosses that bridge, sure, hasn't got there yet. And so what I'm personally seeing at the moment is that every time they do a really nice, huge curated data model and they have people working on it and going, oh, there's a fake thing in here, remove that so the AI doesn't see it and stuff. The AI performs really well. But as soon as people say, well, AI just works more better with more data, so give it all the data in the world, actually it doesn't. And so this thing that we've all been told that AI always does better and machine learning always does better with more data and more information, I believe that actually has a sweet spot or an apex that we are about to reach, at which point we will learn that, we thought that was always true, but actually it's only true to a certain point or apex, and then the returns diminish again. So I think that the technology is amazing, it's incredible, but in some ways is already pushing its own limitations, which is really interesting as well, if that makes sense.
100%. Very much looking forward to what OpenAI comes up with when it comes to search. Next on, James. Yeah, 100%. And also how the webmasters are going to adapt to this, because super curious to see how people are going to be optimizing for AI then.
And also the other thing will be, what will the revenue model be, right?
Exactly.
And that will be might be new advertising platforms for people to get used to as well. So it could be really interesting. So, yeah.
Speaking of AI, let's stay in the same line of thought. Google AI overviews only show for 7% of queries a new low. What's happening here?
Well, if you want the short answer that doesn't make anyone look bad, then what's happening is that Google have removed the AI overview from a lot of search queries, and that's what they've done. But you might want to also ask, why have they done that?
Right.
And, you must have been reading stuff like all these social posts and memes that get sent around and stories you see on the news. Like, some user said some really stupid query to Google, like, how can I make the cheese on my pizza stick on my pizza better? And then the AI overview was like, well, you should glue the cheese to the pizza or something and put glue in it. And so
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I know, it's not great. And it goes back to that thing I was just saying to you. You were very much saying, well, Google, it should have the best AI assistant and the best generative AI. It doesn't. At the moment, my personal perspective is that Google Gemini and Google's AI overview are catching up to OpenAI, who have a lot of data, but infinitely less data than Google have. And what I was just describing to you, the fact that, let's kind of let it loose on the full web data, and then it doesn't understand the difference between fact and fiction in some situations, and it leads to some of these weird readouts that you receive.
Right.
And then Google has to say, okay, well, we know that our AI works when questions are very tailored and linear and specific. So what we'll probably do is we'll rein our AI back so that it only connects with very direct questions, which are more literal and more linear and easy and simpler to answer and are less kind of subjective. And then as we train our AI and as we teach it to have, because it's got all the data in the world, but, its brain, not so smart, Gemini, I don't think, as ChatGPT at the moment. And so as its brain matures and it begins making better decisions, I think you'll then see Google roll the AI overview out over more searches again. But I think what essentially happened was they believed it was more ready and more mature than it was. They let it loose, and then they found it was saying a load of stupid stuff. But there was still obviously many areas where it was providing good and relevant information, still lots of good stuff as well. And so what they did is they said, okay, we're just going to retract it to the areas where we know it gives actual good advice. And then as it learns and progresses, it can expand outward again, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, and I mean, that linking to the previous news, it also shows where Google is at, right, compared to OpenAI, and where the competition is. And we can only imagine that if Google does a good job at this and ends up doing a good job, then you have not only the Google search results displayed on the page, but you also have the AI answer displayed on that page when we reach that. So that's probably going to be a very interesting and competing environment to be in and to watch evolve.
It's live now in the USA, and I've just started seeing AI overview results in the UK as well. But yeah, it's just interesting because when it was first released, you were seeing this AI overview for loads of queries, and then suddenly nowhere near as many anymore. And it's that thing that happened. It kind of shrank back a bit when they realized it wasn't performing quite to the standard that they wanted to. But yeah, as you say, once they kind of tune that up and they get it working to their standard, again, the AI overviews are going to start applying to more and more results again, and that's obviously probably going to drive more zero-click searches, which is another thing that we're going to be talking about. So,
indeed, very soon. But before that, James, Google's response to experts outranked by editors. And that's something we quickly covered in a couple of episodes on the show already. But here again, so the usual suspect, John Mueller, confronted by a question about why anonymous Reddit content can outrank expert advice from credible websites. So what's happening here exactly? And now that we have a bit of context to put this Reddit search together, what's happening here?
So yeah, I mean, when you type in lots of kind of really specific questions like, how do I do this in this video game? Or, what is the best thing to, I don't know, what's the best fuel for my lawnmower or something? I don't know. Quite often Reddit will come up with lots and lots of very specific answers to kind of general life queries. It's kind of almost like a general life version of super user or something, where they quite often answer web developer queries and things like that. Except obviously it's more involved in that because Reddit is like a whole social network. So, but a lot of people will be sitting around thinking, wow, Reddit really just come up loads and loads in Google search results. And they'll be thinking, well, clearly there's kind of some shady deal going on between Google and Reddit, and then Reddit gets preferential treatment in Google search results. And I really don't think it's that at all.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that I don't think it's that is from search volume data and trends data from Google, right? Which is actually showing that over the years, more and more people are refining their search queries by putting the word Reddit at the end. So people are processing a search query, not finding what they want, putting the word Reddit at the end, and then more Reddit results come up, and then they find what they want, and they're happy. So
Interesting.
I actually think that it's more to do with the users are actually demanding it. The users are demanding more Reddit results. That's factually is the case when you look at the search volume data. But the real question is why? Why are the users demanding so much, data specifically from Reddit? And from my own experiences posting queries on Reddit, like, oh, I used to play this old video game in the 90s. Now it won't work on Windows 11. Like, how can I make it work on Windows 11 even though it's not supposed to? And they're like, well, you just edit this resource over here and you set your settings like this, and then it works. Like, Redditors are pretty good and they're pretty useful people, and they help you to do the stuff that you want to do. And so, I don't know. I also think maybe there's like a democratization of information aspect to it as well. Because one of the arguments I often hear in terms of, well, Reddit shouldn't rank well because anyone can post a Reddit post answering a question and it's not verified by anyone, and therefore the information isn't good. It's not good information. But then you have sites like Wikipedia, and that's like an open platform to share information. And now Wikipedia is considered to be one of the most authoritative sites on the entire internet. So if that argument's not going to stop Wikipedia, I just don't see why it should stop Reddit either. It's really difficult for me to conclusively answer the question, but I think it actually has more to do with the fact that people feeling that Reddit doesn't deserve those search results is wrong. And they can't understand why they're wrong, and actually really that's what their problem is. Yeah. But I don't know if you have any perspective on this as well that you'd like to share. I'm kind of interested to hear what you think too.
So, I mean, I'm not in the intricacies of how exactly all of this works. I'm more so when it comes to off-page SEO and like building and earning links. That's more like the how I rock my boat. But when I'm looking at this, I indeed can't help but think about the experts, right, who have established themselves as authorities, in their industry, in their niche for years and years and years, and then like an algorithm update happens, and your content is not ranking as well as an animal sensor on a Reddit thread, and I'm like, Google is always pushing, right, to say, hey, actually, you shouldn't look too much at links. You should focus on creating great content, because if you do create great content, you will be seen as an authority. People will trust you, will build further trust with you, and eventually websites will link to you. But then you have these updates happening, and you're like, yeah, well, was that all for nothing? So I'm like putting myself in the shoes of those experts, and I'm like, yeah, I would be also trying to understand a bit better. Exactly. Now, because at the end of the day, that's what we need to be doing, right? Putting myself in the shoes of the user. James, here we are back in a complete different new closing. So for the people listening to us right now, you're not seeing any difference, hopefully. But so we had to retake the end of our episode. For you watching us right now, as you see, it's a bit of a different atmosphere and decor. Also, James upgraded his gear since the last time we spoke. Right? But so we had one last news to cover that we couldn't because the recording had a little bit of an issue. But we don't want to not cover it. So, James, welcome back.
Yeah, if I look a bit different, I mean, I've changed my shirt. And also the other thing as well is I realized that my webcam was kind of a piece of garbage. It was kind of a piece of trash, So and I thought, well, I better get a new camera. And I looked at the one specially for podcasting, and I was looking on Amazon, and some of those, they were like, well, if you want a good one, it's going to be like 500 or 600 pounds. I was like, no way, man.
Right.
So what I did is I just somehow managed to convert my Android phone into a webcam on a tripod. And it's working. You're doing an amazing job. But so wait, did you actually connect that phone camera to your computer? Yes, with an actual cable. So, because my PC is newer, I mean, that's the main thing I focus on, right? I mean, look at me, like I like my video games and stuff, right? So I have to have one of the latest PCs, and it's actually got like a USB-C connection port at the back. Okay. So I was able to get like a high resolution 2-meter USB-C cable, so USB-C to USB-C. and it goes into the phone, and then the phone is capable of acting as a webcam. It needed a little bit of additional software and stuff, but it's all good. So,
bam,
yeah.
bam, bam. SEO Guru's latest on tech. James, off record, we're going to have to talk about those video games because I'm curious to know what you're playing at. But for now, we need to cover one last piece of news, which is the zero-click searches that are still growing. So maybe to give a bit of context, what's happening here?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about this is, it's kind of something that people have been observing over time. And obviously, like all the changes with the AI overview results and stuff, they've kind of got people a bit paranoid that, there's going to be no clicks at all anymore, and all the clicks are going to completely dry up and go away, and we're going to live in a zero-click world. And it's, you get these kind of, every few years you get these kind of claims in SEO, like this time it's definitely the SEO apocalypse, this time for sure. and it never quite is, and we're still here. So, but essentially, if you go back a number of years, you have Google introducing Knowledge Graph or Knowledge Panel. So Knowledge Graph is the technology that operates behind and links entities together, and then that powers Knowledge Panel. And sometimes if you write stuff into Google like, oh, what's the birthday of a famous celebrity, or kind of more targeted specific questions which revolve around very well-known search entities, then Google will kind of like put up this little box for you in the search results, and it directly answers the question. And since that point in time, the amount of zero-click, well, actually, even before that, but let's just stick to this for now, but especially since that time, the number of zero-click results have been increasing, right? Because people can type in a query, and for certain types of query, when you type in that kind of query, then you could be provided with just straight up the information, and you don't need to click on anything, right? But all of that stuff happened before AI. That's all algorithmically driven. It's not powered by AI. It's not powered by like Gemini or Google AI Overview or something like that. Although I expect those technologies probably will be connected if that process hasn't begun already. But yeah, the point is that, first we had Knowledge Panel and direct answers to questions. Now we have these AI overviews. And so now there's even another thing that stops users needing to click. And, we've kind of just been discussing a bit about Reddit as well. And sometimes people will process a query and then they'll say, well, I'm not going to click because instead of clicking, I'm going to refine and add in extra terms like Reddit and stuff as well, right? So all this, there's kind of like a cauldron of different bits of activity and different technologies that are blending together to kind of reduce the amount of search queries which actually gain clicks, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And, this is, people see the AI overview and they're like, oh, it's the SEO apocalypse. It's a brand new thing. And it's like, well, no, Google's kind of been going in this direction for a very long time. And, for at least like the last probably 10 years or something like that. And, I think obviously we'll end up needing to optimize maybe in different ways. So, Google can't immediately just move to a zero-click model completely because they still need people to click on the ads, right? That's their whole revenue model, is the PPC and people clicking on ads and stuff. But what will it mean when, there are barely any links anymore and, most people get what they need from Google without clicking? I guess at that point, it will become more about, how do we optimize the information that we're publishing somewhere online, whether that's still on a website or somewhere else or fed to Google directly, I don't know. But how do we optimize the information that we're publishing online in such a way that, our brand is picked up kind of more easily by Google's AI and maybe other AIs as well, like if OpenAI released their own search engine? And how do we kind of get AI to, believe that we are the best for this and to kind of reference us instead of other people? And so it's going to kind of swing more in that direction in the future. So I guess what I'm saying is I think there could be a point where zero-click kind of becomes everything and there's no more clicks. But I don't think that's something Google can do overnight because, they have their whole revenue model is based around clicks and ads. And the really interesting thing about that is, there's people working at Google, they have their own account managers who you can work with if you're in paid search and stuff, right? Google account managers instead of agency account managers, that's an option. And there's a whole infrastructure internally at Google and in terms of their analytics and in terms of their revenue model and stuff. And yes, it probably will need to change in time, but is it going to change overnight like a light switch? Probably not, So
100%.
Yeah.
I like to start from the users. Obviously, that reveals a trend as well, right? It's not just Google, because you mentioned it's the algorithm, which is obviously true, but it's also like, I guess it reflects a trend within users who are just like trying to find quick answers to their questions.
And that's like what when we were talking about the Reddit question as well.
Yeah.
And one thing that is kind of raised there is it's like, well, some people think, oh, Google's kind of giving Reddit unfair prominence in the search results. But it's like, well, actually, there's this increasing trend of people adding the word Reddit to the end of their search query because the normal information that's online isn't satisfying them. And that is what does satisfy them. And so, yeah, so algorithmically, you can see why Google might then say, well, instead of waiting for users, Google might analyze all the queries where users then refine by adding the word Reddit at the end. And they might say, well, to increase UX, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that they don't have to make that refinement. And for those kind of queries, we'll just bring up the Reddit results straight away. It makes good sense, right? And that's the kind of way in which an algorithm can begin to kind of drive and like influence change online and like people's psychology and user behavior and where people go and want to go on the internet, right? So
yeah, and I'd like to, so just for the sake of the detail of the analysis, because I'm learning here, but so what I find interesting in the infographic of the article that we've consulted for this news is like, so they kind of give an overview of so what happens after American, so it's focused on the US search in 2024. And so the percentage of zero search clicks are, so the exact number is 58.5%. And what's interesting to see here is that for 37.1%, so not of those 58.5, but like in total, nothing happens, like the browsing session ends. And for the 21.4% remaining, it leads to another search. So as you just mentioned, it's either meaning that, hey, the person actually didn't find what they were looking for, so they're doing another search, maybe trying to find other terms, or it's just like, oh, that raises another question, so I'm going to do another search, but it's still zero click. So that's super, super interesting.
Yeah, that's what we call refinement, by the way. Like when you, and if you hear the phrase, and this is just also for our readers as well, if ever you hear people talking about refinements in search or someone refining their search query, it just usually means that they're stacking multiple search queries together. So
interesting. Super cool. And so another interesting data that kind of stand out, at least to me, is that of the 41.5% who click right after a query, only 1% goes to paid ads. And that means that for 1,000 US Google searches, only 40 end up on paid. Is that correct? No, it's 1%.
Low.
Sorry, it's 1% of the 41.5. So it's actually 4.1 searches end up in paid. I'm missing
it's very low. It's very low.
It's crazy.
And you got to think that this also kind of revolves around psychology as well, and probably like the psychology of searchers and people who use Google, also just subliminally as well, right? Because you think as like an average user that if I say to you as a search expert, show me the exact difference between the non-paid and the paid results in Google and stuff. If I just say that to you, you're like, well, I'm going to find that kind of difficult because I guess I don't know. But as soon as the page is actually in front of you, you do know. And you can see the ads and you spot them and you skip past them. Now, you might not have instant recall of exactly what the ads look like and what differentiates them from the organic results. But when the search results page is there in front of you, you have enough of a latent memory that you know which bits are the ads and you psychologically skip past them because you're like, well, someone's paid for that and I want the real results, right? And not to spit on ads because a lot of people put a lot of effort into their ad targeting and stuff like that, right? And ads can be done really well with the right people managing them. Mm-hmm. But, psychologically, we as users, we just think of ads and we just think, I don't want to see, I press skip on YouTube and on Google, I'm just going to scroll down past it because it's an ad and I don't want to look at it. You know, people have
100%.
that kind of reaction to ads, and it's really interesting that in Google's results, ads arguably have the most prominent placements. You know, if you look at above the fold, you've got like sometimes you even have like 60% of the above the fold content is ads, but it's just people just skip past it, right? So.
Yeah, and that's so you're spot on everything, because when I read this infographic, I was like talking about it with Usam, and he was like, "Yeah, that kind of makes sense actually. I very rarely do click on ads, except if it's like literally the query buy this or find that. Like literally, I want to buy jewelry, whatever. I'm just having a ring in mind right now, so that's why I'm putting that up. But it's like then it might make sense. But if I'm searching about best ring or what type of fabric or material I want for my ring, I will get some paid results, but those are not relevant. So yeah, that makes 100% sense.
And that's also because not all ads are, okay? Not all ads are. You can have non-commercial, non-transactional ads.
True.
Where someone's just looking to promote some material, maybe for awareness, maybe charity stuff. But the thing is, 99.9% of the time, don't quote me on that because I just made it up. Like,
we won't. It's not on record.
Most of the ads are commercial, right? I said not all of them are, but the vast majority of them are. And so if and this is an older term in SEO actually, if your query intent is non-transactional, then you're almost certainly not going to click on an ad, right? But then if you think about it, that's then mistargeting of the ads, and you might then go back to whoever's managing those ads and say, well, maybe you need to insert more negatives in the keyword list because you know, some of your commercial keywords are appearing for non-commercial terms, and that's obviously you're spending money on that and you don't need to be. And that's the whole efficiency of ads. But I think more than anything, what this shows is with such a tiny sliver of traffic ending up going to ads, it really does show the degree to which Google has a monopoly on search. Because unless Google had massive audience in terms of search, and we're talking about most of the audience, right? And you can just type in Google like search engine market share, and various websites come up that will show you the actual statistics. But yeah, Google has the vast majority of the search audience, and that is probably why that even though such a tiny proportion of clicks actually end up going to ads, it actually is still a valid revenue model. It's still a valid way to ascertain profit for Google. But you know, if OpenAI, if their new search product is as powerful as their AI is, because as I've said, I still believe that AI is more powerful than Google's AI at the moment, and I'm not going to stop saying it until I stop thinking it's true.
Can we quote you on that, James? Is that okay?
Yeah, and you can quote me on it because I opened the quote with "I think," so kind of disarms it, right? So it's all good. But yeah, the you know, if other platforms start eating into that, you know, Google are going to have two massive problems on their hands, because on the one hand, they're then going to have to recognize, okay, we can't kind of do this half and half AI overview and clicks thing anymore, because people just want the response, not the results that we're giving.
Right.
And that's going to cause a really big problem, because then, you know how I said that revenue models can't just be flipped like a switch overnight? Well, watch people try, you know. There's going to be a serious attempt, you know.
Yeah. And
the other issue that they're going to get is that suddenly that 1% of clicks that goes to the ads is going to, you know, if half of their audience is taken away, that's half the amount of people, and you know, that's half the amount of ad revenue. Or either that, or they're going to have to say, well, we don't have as big of an audience, so we're going to have to increase the bidding prices for the ads. And then people might say, well, okay, I'm going to go to Facebook ads where at least I can put pictures in and stuff, and I don't really want to be bothered with stuff like keyword research anymore anyway. So so they're going to end up, if they're not careful, fighting a war on two fronts, you know. And it's going to be real interesting to see how that plays out. So
100%. James, thank you so much for this first edition of the SEO Gurus monthly update. Anything that we didn't cover in this episode that you want to maybe wrap this up with?
I don't know, maybe if we think about some kind of like common thread between all the news items or something like that. I don't know. I mean, what stuff have we gone through? We've gone through I guess the big things, the European Commission and the Italian courts and the DMA stuff, right? And the kind of probe into Google. And that's kind of almost relevant to, I suppose that's kind of relevant to Google at the moment, because with, it's about, so the nature of that issue revolves around how Google links user data across different platforms, right?
Yeah.
So, but what we're seeing is it kind of is related to some of the AI stuff, because it's kind of like, it's at a time where Google really needs to be racing forwards and pushing forwards, and the courts are kind of like dragging them back a bit. And I'm sure a lot of people think that's a good thing, and it probably is a good thing, but maybe if you're at Google, it doesn't seem like so much of a good thing. You know what I mean?
100%.
And then you've got, the Reddit stuff and the AI stuff and the zero-click stuff. I mean, all of that kind of fits together quite nicely, because, people refining their search results more often increases zero clicks. The knowledge graph increases zero clicks. The AI stuff increases zero clicks. And the competition as well, like OpenAI saying we're going to bring out our own search product. And, if you listen to people at OpenAI, up until this point, they've been quite keen to say that, they might be essentially sort of like, kind of integrating some of their technology into Bing and stuff. But I think for OpenAI, I think in their headspace, they're hoping to create like an entirely new search product that just doesn't work the way that Google and anything else works. And so if you consider that as well, you've got like zero clicks being pushed up. And then on the other side, you've got like, other competition who are going to maybe release completely zero click search models. And then that's going to pressure Google even more and then they're going to have to change their revenue model. It's going to be real interesting times. I suspect in the next, few months or so, we're going to see some of these interesting changes starting to kind of coalesce. So
kind of unfold 100%. And for me, one of the key takeaways of this episode is John Mueller and the different Google personalities who are like really speaking up. And I mean, speaking up not in the sense of like saying stuff that they shouldn't, but more like, just being the public speakers of Google. And that's super interesting to see that. Yeah. Like search advocate. Yeah, so really, really cool. And as said, right, waiting for John Mueller to come on one of these shows someday. We'll ping John in LinkedIn. Let's see if he reacts. James, thank you so much for this episode. See you next month.
Hey, thank you so much for making it to the end. For more content updates, visit our website at ghapodcast.com, and don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn for more tips and insights on SEO. See you in the next episode.